what the world is making visible more than ever as our awareness is growing is that the repetition of trauma from the past is all around us, and not just around us, but also within us in our responses to what is happening. And it feels as if with rising awareness, our eyes are opening, we can see it, and the need for tools and consciousness that help us to um, bring responses to it that are responsible, that come from a place of ability, is really growing rapidly in more and more people. So, we offer as much as we are able skills training for how can I learn the skills that help me meet the world with more awakeness and more presence. And I think in a way that is the heart of what we do. How can we've seen in some of our global social witnessing calls recently how the fear levels and the stress levels are rising. I think more and more of us are feeling overwhelmed also because some of what is happening in the world is so visible and so extremely painful and so close to our ancestral trauma layers that whole areas of our own foundations are shaking. And we feel the pain more and more acutely as our sensitivity grows, as we start to heal, our nervous systems start to open. So it's I think many of us are feeling that actually being fully present is so painful. And that is the truth of it. It's very painful. So, yeah, so having some skills and feeling that we have a community that we can come back to co-regulate with, that we're not alone in this is, I think, the first layer of our giving, our service. But then we have the international labs where we really go deeper into specific areas of collective trauma to address them, to start the process of integrating collective trauma, which is incredible. And at the beginning, it feels very heavy. When we did the first round of labs in 2020, it felt very, very thick. We already felt a change somehow in the labs that were running in 2024. The reports on those are just coming out in the next months, but it's been amazing, some of the experience. So I really invite our listeners to come to our website, have a look at that. Yeah, and then we do a lot of trauma relief work in the hot crisis areas. So we especially have trauma relief projects in Ukraine. This is a project that has grown over 3 years now. We've offered more than 5,000 free one-on-one sessions, more than 250 free group sessions. And this year, we're coming in collaboration also with universities, different organizations in Ukraine to deliver a trauma-informed leadership and societal resilience training to 250 young Ukrainians to develop them into resilience facilitators who will be able to offer circles of support in their environments in these difficult circumstances. And we're starting to develop the same in our Palestine and Jewish Israel trauma relief projects. And we're also looking at other areas in the world, Africa. So developing tools that allow us to multiply our trauma relief work in different areas. Yeah, and of course, all of that sits within a larger framework of ongoing training, education, and research. And yeah, that is probably the best time where we can also turn towards the Global Social Witnessing Facilitator training, which we are developing at the moment, which is starting in June. And maybe, Thomas, if it's okay, I would love to turn this around and ask you a question about this, because you developed global social witnessing in, I think it was 2016, 2017, so quite a long time ago. And I would love to ask you what this practice could mean in the world today, and what it really means to move from being a bystander, passively receiving the news of the world constantly in a way that is very overwhelming, to becoming an active global social witness who brings presence and embodiment to a global field of witness.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that's exactly like you framed it already. Like I felt, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, like that we need besides, an individual practice, like a contemplative practice, a meditation practice, self-regulation practices. There are many practices that we can practice basically for ourselves, for our own inner regulation system. But I felt we are living in a time where we are all global citizens through the technology we are using. And so we need a practice that in a way fits for the time. And at that time we called it 5 minutes a day, that we will sit with some news feed or be a witness to something that happens. It can be in our community, close to our home, or on the other side of the world. It doesn't really matter, because the more we understood like the principles of collective trauma, it's to see that where we are collectively hurt, we don't even know what we don't see or feel. So we cannot be a full witness to certain events that are happening because we are not fully embodied by the nature of trauma, individual trauma, ancestral trauma, and collective trauma. So we say we see things, we can read them, the news headlines and on news outlets and on social media, but actually either we get very triggered in the sense of hyperreactive, or we get triggered in the sense of indifference, distant, or not connected, numb. And so, yes, then I still read the headlines, but I don't feel much because I'm already overwhelmed. And then I say, yeah, okay, I can deal with it, but actually we can't deal with it when we are numb, because our body says I'm not here. I'm not, my emotional system and my physical system are not responsive to the event, which means we leave that event, whatever is that event, in the world alone. And which means we are actually not contemporary witnesses, and that is subject of the or is part of the repetition compulsion of those events. So that's why we said, okay, let's develop this into a practice, and global social witnessing is the practice that developed out of that initial practice, where we said, okay, if groups of people practice that, we can see, it's not that we have to be able to feel and see everything, but we need to become aware how much of the world and events in our neighborhood, even in our house where we live with in different apartments, there's stuff happening that we don't notice, or in our communities, or globally, that actually many events are not being holistically witnessed. And I think so based on that, when we see the data that is numbed because of the history that we have been born into, is the reverse, like the negative and positive. Like when you do a casting, you have a casting form and you have a sculpture and they fit perfectly together. The shadow, the collective shadow, fits perfectly with all the events that we are not fully witnessing. And becoming aware of that end of our conscious universe is actually the beginning of the expansion of our conscious universe. And this is a collective practice. And I think the Pocket Project is very dedicated to furthering or developing like collective spaces where that practice can be more and more implemented. And because I think we need to come together as groups. Of course, we can practice this by ourselves too, but it's very powerful to do this with groups. And maybe you can share a little bit about how global social witnessing has been applied already. I mean, there were many, many moments when it has been applied already. Maybe you can give us a few examples of what you have seen and how that felt, or maybe what was the impact of those sessions that the Poker Project already had. And then we can talk a little bit more about the deeper facilitation.
Yeah, beautiful. I think what you just said about becoming more aware about where the edges of our consciousness and where that stops. And in a way, you spoke to it and you've spoken to it in many, many other contexts, that there's this mirror image also of where our consciousness ends in terms of what we can see in the world out there, and where our consciousness ends within our own embodiment, and the edges where our nervous system stops feeling because we are touching traumatized material within us. And I think one of the beautiful aspects of this world is that I learn to know myself more fully and meet my inner edges as I get to know the world more fully and meet the edges of even our collective consciousness in the world. There's something so beautiful about that, because it can only start happening and unfolding when we bring compassion to these edges. And when the outer and the inner, in a way, comes very close through our presence and our ability to stay with, not to pathologize, but to bring caring to the places where our seeing stops. So there's something incredibly powerful that we experience in this.